Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight is Dao De Jing. We'll be covering verses 75 and 76. To read your favorite version of this verse 75, go ahead and type exclamation point in the chat. Evanique.
All right.
Followed by David.
Okay, so this is God as Nature Sees God, a Christian reading. Chapter 75. Oh gosh. The people are starving because their leaders eat up all their money in taxes, and so they are hungry. The people are rebellious because their leaders are intrusive, and so they protest. The people make light of death because their leaders live so well at their expense, and so they expect death. Therefore, it seems that one who does not grasp this life too tightly is better off than one who clings.
Thank you, Evanique. Next up, we have David.
So the thing in English, translation. Why are the people starving? Because the rulers eat up the money in taxes. Therefore, the people are starving. Why are the people rebellious? Because the rulers interfere too much. Therefore, they are rebellious. Why do the people think so little of death? Because the rulers demand too much of life. Therefore, the people take death lightly. Having little to live on, one knows better than to value life too much.
Thank you, David. Next up, we have Katie.
This time I'm reading from Jim Clatfelter. The people starve when taxes take the bulk of what they earn. When leaders interfere too much, they get rebellion in return. The people do not fear to die if leaders rob them of their lives, but taking no more than you need, you see that everybody thrives.
Thank you, Katie. Next up, we have Penny.
Yes. Am I unmuted? Yeah.
Yes.
When people go, this is J.H. McDonald. When people go hungry, the government's taxes are too high. When people become rebellious, the government has become too intrusive. When people begin to view death lightly, wealthy people have too much, which causes others to starve. Only those who do not cling to their life can save it.
Thank you, Penny. Next up, we have Brian.
Okay, this again is from Yasuhiko Kimura.
Oh, good.
Why are the people starving? Because the rulers eat up the money in taxes. That is why. Why are the people difficult to govern? Because the rulers interfere too much. That is why. Why do the people think so little of death? Because the rulers think too much of their own life. That is why. Those who do not overvalue their life are wiser than those who do.
Thank you, Brian. I don't see any other explanation points in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and read the Ursula Le Guin version, and then we'll go ahead to Jason's version. Greed. People are starving. The rich gobble taxes. That's why people are starving. People rebel. The rich oppress them. That's why people rebel. People hold life cheap. The rich make it too costly. That's why people hold it cheap. By those who don't live for the sake of living are worth more than the wealth seekers. Then she just has a brief quote, and I'll just read this really quickly. How many hundreds of years ago was this book written? And yet still this chapter must be written in the present tense. So with that, I will hand it off to Aman.
All right, let me find my screen to share. Oops, and can everyone see my screen?
Yes. 70, we could see 76, yeah.
One off, There we go. Value
Amon, can you
living.
make it a little bigger?
I think so. There. Is that
Yeah.
better?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
Excellent.
much better. Thank you.
Value living. The starvation of the people is caused by the excessive taxation from their ruler, so they are hungry. The unruliness of the people is caused by the interference from their ruler, so they are unruly. The disregarding of death by the people is caused by the obsession for excessive living from their ruler, so they are death disregarding. Only those rulers who don't work solely for their own living are better than those who value their lives too highly. Couple of quick comments on this chapter. One, the grammar of this last line is a nightmare in Chinese and is horribly difficult to translate. It's much harder if you remove the parentheticals, which anytime those are there, it's for clarification, but it's not in the text. You get something that reads more, only those who don't work solely for their own living are better than those who value their lives. And that has confounded many a person. So those parentheticals help to express who the subject is in this final sentence, the rulers, and what it means to be better than those who value their lives. There's a implied too highly valuing your life. And if you think about that in this context, it makes a lot of sense. If you actually have regard, if you value living writ large from all people, then you cannot place too high a premium on your own life, especially if you are in a position to take resources from others. This idea of being death disregarding seems a little obtuse unless you refer back one chapter, in chapter 74, where he talks about the threat and punishment of death and how people who are constantly made to fear death eventually don't fear death, and how that can lead a ruler to off with their heads, the Queen of Hearts sort of analogy. Here, this idea of death disregarding, or the people being death disregarding, is directly reflective back to that previous chapter and how they got to be there in the first place. So as a standalone, chapter 75 is somewhat challenging, but I think the overall message seemed pretty consistent throughout the translations. I do think that last line, though, trips up a few different translators because, like I said, the grammar, even in Chinese, is really, really onerous. In fact, I can read a quote here from one of the scholars so that you don't have to take my word for it. He says, the last two lines are somewhat awkward grammatically in Chinese with a change in subject. Literally, they say, only those who do not act with living in mind, only this is worth more than valuing life. That's how he translates it. So I like Jason's translation because I think it reads more clearly, especially with the parentheticals. It makes it much easier to see what is actually under examination in this passage. It's a short one, so buckle in. They tended to be long discussions. You're muted, Joe.
Thank you, Aman. Yeah, so there is actually quite a bit that we can actually take away from this particular chapter. And I really do think that it really does relate closely to verse 74, where it talks about the fear of death. But go ahead and actually, anybody go ahead and type your explanation points in the chat now to talk about what you have taken away from this particular verse.
I'm not sure if Suki wanted to read or has a comment.
Oh, yeah.
Comment.
Okay. Go right ahead, Suki.
Oh, so I can go now? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm Chinese, so I understand the Chinese, the original Chinese, but it's in the old way. So it's true, it's very difficult even for me as a Chinese to understand what he's talking about. So two things I want to point out, so that might help us to understand. First is, this is the way it's said to a ruler. So the third point, the people are not afraid of death. Actually, there's a hidden context, is people not afraid of death to have a revolution, to kill the king. So that's why I said people are not afraid of death. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to me. Like, why you talk about people not afraid of death? Because in the Chinese translation or interpretation of this paragraph is in the context of the people will have a revolution to kill you. So your whole kingdom, your whole dynasty will die. So to the last sentence, they have two people. So one is the ruler, right? So if you are not only live on yourself, you are better at ruling the people. So you value people's living. This is one meaning. The second meaning is, if you do the right way, you will not be killed by the people. So in this way, you are better taking care of your own life. So there are two kind of life you will be better at. One is better life for the people, and people will not kill you. So in this way, you taking better care of your own life. So that's the two meanings. Like from the English translation, it's not very clear. So that's something I want to add.
Why don't we, we'll go to Evanique first, but I have a couple questions for Aman and Suki. Maybe actually, may want to reply after Evanique first.
Just wanted to say thank you, Amanda. Also, thank you, Suki, because it made it make sense. Because I was a little lost on this one, and I think it sounds like it's correct, because if you think about it, how do revolutions start, and why do revolutions start? Revolutions start when the leadership becomes so oppressive that it's almost, people are willing to die to get free from that oppression. And you've seen it throughout history. You see it, French Revolution, you know, when the French aristocrats were literally starving the peasants, and they had a revolution because, you know, they were just tired of living the way they were living, and there was no way out, I think. And I think if you look at, like, in America, you look at civil rights, when, you know, people were tired of having their freedoms taken away and having their ability to support their families taken away, or not being able to live a life that they see other people live, and having no chance of getting there because of the laws, they literally took to the streets knowing that they were risking their lives in order to obtain this freedom. So, but people won't do that if they know that you as a leader have their best interest at heart. If they feel like that you have their best interest at heart, they will love you. So I think both iterations of what Suki said is correct, and it makes total sense. It's like, you know, some leaders get power hungry, and they think they could do anything because they have their armies, and they have, you know, they have the backup of leadership. But you back people into a corner, they will eventually fight their way out, even if it means a physical death.
Thank you, Evanique. I want to ask Aman really quickly about this passage, and because the one that I had read where it talks about the rich gobbling up taxes, and that's why people are starving. At that particular moment in time, what I'd read a couple of different um, interpretations that had talked about what taxes were at that time. And some say it was actually like a tax on food was actually rice. But then there were others that actually said it was a tax on money. And so this idea of starving because you're being overtaxed was an actual, really a real thing, that this is an actual, is that,
it in the spring and autumn's period, it would have been a very real thing to extract taxation from people in the form of bushels of rice. That would be a viable currency for exchange. And it was usually hoarded. The very old, like pre-Zhou dynasty version of this would be the Wang, the king, would collect up the resources from everybody in the village, in the kingdom probably being about what we think of as like the size of a small county, and storehouse it in one place and dull it out through the winter so that it could actually feed an entire population. But obviously that sort of, granary system and, lauder didn't work so well because there's always excess. There's always the ability to skim some off the top and to distribute unevenly. There were landed gentry by the time of the spring autumns period, and those people would have other currencies available to them to be able to offer up in place of actual foodstuffs. So they might be able to offer up silks, they might be able to offer up things that allure to the king or the emperor as we get closer to Chinshi Huangdi. And then what good is a really fancy painting to the greater good of everybody? It does nothing for being able to ensure that you're feeding everyone through the winter. It just ingratiates you to the emperor and makes you more favored. You're basically taking something of no real value and you are assigning it a value, kind of the idea that things are worth as much as people are willing to pay for them. If I'm willing to accept 16 bushels of rice, but this scroll in place of, then I say that scroll is worth 16 bushels of rice, and nobody's going to argue with me, even if they implicitly feel how unfair it would be. The other thing I did want to mention about this was one of the lines Jason used. It's the line that says the disregarding of death by the people is caused by the obsession for excessive living from the ruler. Mm-hmm. And that choice of term obsession was a translation of this word, qiu, which a lot of other translators translate as pursuit of or desire for. I offered the suggestion of obsession with because it's an allusion to the other folly that was very often part of the rulers or the kings or later emperors, which was that obsessive pursuit of immortality. And I think we discussed how, they were drinking potions at times laced with things like mercury, and it was bringing early demise to some of those people. And so I do think that here, translating qiu as obsession both is more true to the meaning and also sort of indicates that other obsession of life that was the folly of rulers.
Thank you, Aman. Quite a bit to actually take away from that. Let's see if the next, oh, okay, so there's no one else in the chat. One of the things that I actually wanted to bring up was this idea. I kind of saw some element of Wu Wei there in this passage. Oh, I see. Oh, okay, Brian. Okay, Brian has something very important to say. So I'm going to let Brian go ahead, because I noticed how many exclamation points there.
Okay, I just wanted to share a conversation I had. First of all, I want to thank Suzuki for her comment. I thought that was a great comment that really helped with my understanding. I wanted to share a conversation I had with a family member, and I waited until there were no other comments this week. And this family member just got his PhD in political philosophy at Notre Dame, and now he's launching on his academic career at Michigan State. And he says, sometimes he says the most incredible things, but he said this weekend, I got together with him. He said that China has no real political philosophy. I couldn't believe that. I really couldn't, and I didn't disagree with him because I've disagreed with him on a lot of other stuff already. But
choose your battles.
yeah. But I'm going to share with him like this, the Dao De Jing is written for rulers, for the sage king, and there's so much in it. There's also, I'm doing the Asian philosophy with Jason, and there's so much political philosophy in there that really predates, that's really surprisingly identical to Western political philosophy. And the Chinese really anticipated people like Thomas Hobbes and Jean-Jacques Rousseau and so many others by more than 1,000 years. It's really, to me, just quite striking. But the other thing that struck me is just how arrogant, I mean, ignorant and arrogant and offensive. I didn't say any of that to my family member. But that's a problem. That in itself, this is a man who just got his PhD in political philosophy. And he says the Chinese have no political philosophy because he's ignorant about it. He jumps to this amazing conclusion. I don't know, that's just, to me, that just underlines how important this kind of a meetup is, and other meetups that are really trying to bridge that divide. It's, honestly, I was shocked when he said that, and was glad I could bring that to the meeting here and share it.
No, and I'm glad you did, because that's, when I read this particular passage, the wisdom in it is timeless. And it's kind of something that is kind of true. And I definitely don't, I mean, I see in some ways that actually, and we've talked about this in previous meetups, how China is actually making a return to the Tao. And part of the Center for Digital Life series during the 3 spheres, when we were covering that there is some, that there is a retrieval of certain Taoist principles that the Chinese now recognize. So I would disagree with your family member.
Yeah, he's obviously wrong. I mean, I just can't believe he said that. He's got a lot to learn, obviously, because you don't say, he said that to us. None of us is Chinese, but you got to stop and think. You can't put things out there that would be offensive to the people you're talking about. That's just, I don't know, that's to me so basic. But anyway,
I think Aman actually has the answer in the chat. I'm not going to announce it on while I'm being recorded, but go ahead, Suki, you're next.
I mean, Joseph, you're right. China is going backwards. So that's why in modern China right now, they don't have the philosophy because it's pure dictation. They pick dictatorship. And they don't want to refer to the, oh, like you said, it's everlasting, this philosophy. So even when I was in school, Taoism, that text was not a big chunk of our study. The party just don't want us to learn that much, because the government right now is doing the totally opposite of this teaching. So
Thank you for that, Suki. Next up, Aman.
Well, I want to congratulate your relative, Brian. He can now be wrong at a PhD level, because he could not have said something absolutely just patently untrue. In fact, it's arguable. It's not only arguable, it is argued often that the only philosophy that existed in China was political philosophy, that all philosophy in China was at heart and at greatest concern, a concern about how to govern and how to run the state. Because that was the penultimate enterprise of the Chinese empire. And, you know, they had a little practice, just like 5,000 years or so, that they really got to sort of see how that experiment worked. So, yeah, I introduce him to some Han Fei, to introduce him to some legalism.
Yeah.
On a different side, though, and I absolutely wanted to say, Suki, thank you for your comments, because yes, there is a very dire warning at work in this chapter, which is, you know, you can only push these people so far, and then they are going to come after you with pitchforks and torches. That is absolutely true. And when we've talked about the Dao De Jing in the past, we've talked about how it is an instruction manual, you know, teacher to young princeling. But oftentimes, allegorically, it's treated as advice for the every person as well. And so when you look at chapter 75, and it reads so pedantically as advice to a ruler, how then does this interpret to the behavior of oneself in regards to oneself? Who are you sovereign over? Who would you levy taxes against in your own life? And how might it cause some privation on their part? I'm not going to say I absolutely have an answer for that, but I think it's a question worth considering when reading this, because it was another lens, another hermeneutic to read this through. And even at the time, a ruler could take this lesson at face value, but they'd return to it possibly at a later date to say, you know, why am I always stretched so thin? I thought I was doing everything right. Oh, because I'm taxing myself every which way and leaving no resources for my everyday needs. And I think we all can probably plead guilty to having done that in our own lives in pursuit of a goal once or twice.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that's that I had taken away from this is as well, and is the importance of sacrifice, as in these lines, in the sense that, so reading, I think it was a J.H. McDonald version, was like, only those who do not cling to their life can save it. But essentially that you're not trying to hoard or take more than you actually need. Therefore, what are you doing? You're then sacrificing for others, and that is sacrificing for the greater group as well. So I think that that's one thing that I had taken away from it, and it's true. I think we can all look at ourselves at different points in our lives when we've probably taken more than maybe we should. So next up, I have, hang on one moment. I have Katie, then I have Suki.
Yeah, I see it as like any government anywhere. Well, not anywhere. Sorry, take that back. But even if we just compare the U.S. government with this government, that they're accountable to the people. So here you would have a less extreme reaction. You might have to worry about being unseated, but there, like they might come and rebel against you if they don't feel like it's you're representing them.
Yes, no, I mean, I agree wholeheartedly with that. Yes, it's also, there's an element that you can have like an unrealistic expectations of other people that they're going to keep giving when there's nothing more for them to give. And then ultimately that ends up badly for everyone involved, including at this point, what it would have been a prince and it still holds true to political people today. So next up we have Suki.
Yeah, thank you for all the sharing. And Amon, thank you so much for inspiring me to think what the modern lesson we can draw from this Asian teaching. What I think of is what I can be a better ruler of my own life. If I see all the objects or all the experiments I have as a 3D kingdom, how can I be a better ruler of these assets? I'm thinking of the balance of giving and the receiving. So that paragraph describes how obsessive, receiving as a king will lead you to dying. So in my daily life, am I want to only maximize my pleasure, my benefits, or I take other people in the equation? So thank you for reminding me to think in this way. Thank you.
Thank you. So next up we have Ebony.
Yeah, when another thing I thought of in this conversation and where I see it today is the Great Resignation, or I think I saw an article today where they call it the Great Job Swap, where people are realizing that, corporations are asking way too much of them and they're saying no. And, they're not coming with pitchforks, but they are choosing to leave for better conditions. And it's leaving corporations with a lack of employees, which is kind of, in a lot of corporations, it's the equivalent of starving them. And now they're wondering why. So I just thought about that, and, how corporations would require so much of your time, your effort, and your energy, and people are just saying no.
Thank you for that, Ebony. Excellent point. Amon.
Yeah, I've picked on, I think, Facebook one time or two in the course of these conversations as a good example, abject example or abject lesson in how not to do some of the lessons that Dao De Jing speaks about. But I think Ebony hits the nail right on the head with the most avarice of corporations that have long looked to extract every single ounce and penny of value out of their employees without giving anything back are now not getting back their employees. It's almost, I find the term the Great Resignation needs some replacing with the great refusal of exploitation. However, having said that, there is I think, kind of in the same sense that I can't remember who I'm quoting, but somebody said, I will accept corporations or people when Texas puts one to death. I don't think that the corporation per se is under any sort of threat. Maybe the shareholders' values are dropping, maybe the CEOs lose their job, the corporation could dissolve, but there is a real and mortal danger to somebody in the position that this was speaking of to not just their livelihood, but their very life. The mandate of heaven was a concept in China that said you get to rule as long as you act appropriately, as long as you are moral, as long as you maintain that mandate of heaven. Or I think we had a long conversation about heaven before, so let's say the mandate of the heavens, just so there's not any confusion. When it was relinquished was when somebody else managed to overthrow you and install their own dynasty. And in that way, it was a perfect feedback loop of, oh, well, they must have lost the mandate because otherwise they wouldn't have been overthrown. So that threat always kind of did exist in the background, no matter how powerful the emperors became, that they might lose that mandate. And it's kind of what Katie was saying about ruling with the concern of the people, but not necessarily with the consent of the people. It wasn't as responsive as that necessarily, but they had to be at least cared for earnestly. And when it became more self-indulgent, self-aggrandizing, those dynasties tended to topple pretty quickly. The Anusong Rebellion, which is a tale from the Three Kingdoms, is probably the most famous of palace intrigue and selfish desires tearing apart the whole empire in a really catastrophic way. So yeah, there were all sorts of additional layers to this, that simply seeing the Gap close for its doors forever, which personally would not break my heart, and I'm not going to pick on Facebook this week, doesn't hold the same sort of societal catastrophic effects as this sort of catastrophe would, because even though that was a mechanism for validating rulership, the process of rebellion and revolution was never pretty. It was always ugly, and it could be hard for generations of people.
Now, one thing I want to maybe ask about this is there's an element of Wu Wei that I kind of saw, and I don't know if this is a good way of looking at it. Perhaps you can correct me if I'm wrong, Amon. Is this idea of not interfering too much with people's lives, in addition to the idea that you're ruling with their interests at heart as well. But there's this constant temptation to keep taking when we maybe shouldn't. And I was wondering if that was kind of this idea of non-action was kind of important here.
You absolutely hit a nail on the head, and I didn't bring it up because it's a little into the weeds, but this phrase is where you get that term interference from, and that's Yo Wei. That is, I hesitate to say the opposite, because one thing that Dao De Jing is very careful of is ever placing things in opposition. But it, as much as there could be opposition, this is the opposite of Wu Wei. This is action with intention, or action with effort, or action with want. Completely antithetical to the idea of Wu Wei. And so in that single line where it says the unruliness of people is caused by the interference, the Yahweh, of their ruler, that is, or Yahweh, excuse me, that is a indication that people become unruly when the ruler fails to utilize Wu Wei and instead resorts back to this sort of Yahweh, which would be, it's almost sometimes said as a complimentary term. You can actually hear this in modern Mandarin where somebody speaking about like a young man might say, oh, they have, you know, 有会, which we might have a similar phrase in English like, oh yeah, he's an up and comer, you know, he's going to Notre Dame and getting his PhD. That boy's got gumption, he's got go get him, he's got, you know, grit. So it is used colloquially in Chinese in that same sort of way. But in this text very specifically, it's being used antithetical to Wu Wei and as a cautionary, this is what causes things to start going off the rails. This is why people go unruly, is because you're meddling.
Now, I brought up the idea of sacrifice as well a little bit earlier, and maybe I can expand on that a little bit. This idea that if you're living, you're clinging on to life, you're hanging on to it as you're valuing your life more than you're valuing other people. It's within accordance with nature to want to survive. But this idea that you're going to do it at the expense of others would be not in accordance with nature. Am I understanding that correctly, Iman? Maybe you could check, but that's the way one of the interpretations that I had when I was reading this as well, is that again, it's very natural to want to preserve one's own existence, but it's when you start to do it at the expense of the whole is when you're actually acting against the Tao itself.
I'm
Could be
gonna
wrong.
have to.
Go ahead,
No, I don't
please.
think you're necessarily wrong, and I do think that that would be a very post-Hobbesian way of Westerners understanding this idea.
Okay.
But that's because we have this notion of the war of all against all that comes from, you know, Hobbes and that whole intellectual tradition that basically says it's a dog eat dog world and people are naturally self-serving. We have that deeply ingrained in us. History doesn't necessarily bear that out, especially when you look to pre-agricultural cultures, especially, but also with low agriculture or subsistent cultures, you see a lot of cooperative sort of behaviors. And there are scientific studies that definitely deal with the whole problem of altruism from our view that others say is not problematic. It is the steady state of humanity to actually be altruistic. The structures are what cause us to actually be overly competitive. That's my editorializing, but I think at this time and place, because Lao Tzu was such a rejectionist of those sort of structures that build these incentives, he would have argued, if there was a he to argue, that it is natural for people to care for one another in an egalitarian way, in an equitable way. And that it's only because you start getting, you know, fancy pieces of silk instead of the food you need that you start thinking of yourself as worth more, of value more, of your life having more worth than someone else's. I'm not arguing against the, you know, agricultural revolution necessarily, but I do think that there is some very deep insight within the Dao De Jing to what is human nature. And I think Lao Tzu's argument is human nature really isn't this sort of driven, intentional focus, go get them, do, achieve, build sort of things that our societies make us into. We really are much better at sharing, about caring about those in our community immediately around us, about wanting a tribe to call our own. And we see echoes of that in the modern day everywhere.
Yes, thank you for that. I think that's, you know, that's an important message with this in particular, this particular passage. is that it is for actually, as Suki had said, is that the idea of how we value people, and how the king actually values people, and essentially how we, let me see. Go ahead, Brian.
I wanted to echo what Aman just said. I find that in a lot of these writings, the political philosophy writings, there are a lot of assumptions embodied in the text, in the words, and in the institutions that are, if you will, taken for granted, seemingly taken for granted because they're the basis for the text. Here we talk about a government and the people. I mean, that's based on, to have a government, you need cooperation, and a people is some kind of identity, and again, cooperation. And I really think that the cooperation is so fundamental and basic to these, to human nature and to what's being discussed here. The focus tends to be on, like on this text, it tends to be on the abuses that can arise out of that, out of those forms of cooperation, the imperfections that can arise. But I really think that that kind of cooperation is very fundamental. Just another example that comes to my mind, because we've been recently doing the Gospel of John, and another, Jesus' teaching was, well, it's an interesting period because that was the Hellenistic period when we're moving beyond the city-state more to an empire, and different empires, different peoples being governed by, it's not each people governing itself. It's each different groups of people are being governed by an emperor and that other people. And in that context, the cooperation that was necessary to hold the city-states together, the peoples together, was not always forthcoming from the emperor. It was still left, even though the governments in some extent had been decapitated, the welfare and the cooperation that was necessary was still left for the people. And that's one of the things that Jesus in his teaching emphasized is, taking care of the poor and the sick, and the cooperative elements of society, which were really, to some extent, being neglected and left by the empires to the old family and city-state structures.
They started serving the empires and not the people, in a way. Would that be an accurate?
Well, the emperor was more focused on.
Well, the emperor's position, I should say, like
What?
the form of it.
What's that?
Like the form, the actual, like the position, more or less the forms, they were serving more the emperor's, the way the government was actually functioning. They were serving more the government than they were the people themselves.
Yes, the empire's structure was serving the.
Yeah, so yeah, I was trying to use a form follows function kind of approach to this particular problem. So I was trying to.
My emphasis was that, yes, I really want to agree with Aman that the cooperation is so fundamental and often taken for granted. Even embedded in this text, I was looking at it. It says, it's something that struck me when I read it, is how there's so many things that are deemed to already exist, like the people and the government and taxes. That's all assumed in this text. So it's really a very modern picture of things that modern, and that we still have the same structures today. The other thing I'll just point out quickly is that I have two different translations here, Stephen Mitchell and J.H. MacDonald, and they just are inverting the text. And in some ways it's a small point, but for as regards governing, which is one of the issues here, it's a significant point. Mitchell says this: when taxes are too high, people go hungry. So that's a cause and effect. Cause, taxes are too high, people go hungry. People can go hungry for other reasons, but yes, it is true that when taxes are too high, people will go hungry. I'm willing to believe that that was the state of affairs when this was written. But then J.H. McDonald writes, when people go hungry, the government's taxes are too high. And that's not a cause and effect, I don't think, in the same way. I think the emphasis there is on the remedy. That's just my own reading in the way he's put it. When people go hungry, so in that case, the government's taxes are too high, and the remedy implied is then you need to lower the taxes. It may not be that the taxes were too high in the past, but now that the people are hungry, you need to lower the taxes. So it's not a big deal, but I just thought as regards governing, it does make a little bit of difference how these things are stitched together.
I know, I agree. I mean, ultimately, I think that this is just not to take more than what the people can give. That's one of the most important things that I see coming back here. And this is, again, that's a very delicate, that's hard to figure out sometimes what that is. But obviously, if people are hungry, then that's highly problematic. And then not only does it lead to the demise of the structure of the state, but it would also lead to your own personal demise, that you keep coming back for more when people can't give any longer. Yeah, it is interesting how Stephen Mitchell approaches this as well, like the difference between Stephen Mitchell and J.H. McDonald approaches this, how they reverse those two. Thank you for those comments. Katie.
Yeah, I think today, like if you read it today, like using kind of the same language, it would be like taxes need to be this high so no child is left behind, kind of no child goes hungry. And I think one of my thoughts too is I'd never want to be in a ruler putting policies that are unpopular through. Like you're obviously never going to get everybody behind you, but that'd be really difficult to be putting policies through where people really don't like what you're doing.
That's a very good, well, what Katie just said flagged a point for me.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the assumption in this text is that the taxes collected by the government will not redound for the welfare of the people, for example, to satisfy their hunger. That those taxes are being used for some other purpose than social welfare.
Right.
If they weren't, then the situation Katie outlined would be true, that they're collecting taxes and what you're really getting is a proper redistribution of the wealth. But here we're assuming it's not a proper redistribution.
And I really do. I think that it comes back to the concept of wu-wei, where again, it's not interference, because one common theme that I see between all of these translations is specifically the Stephen Mitchell one is the act for the people's benefit, trust them, leave them alone. So it's kind of almost, it really is it's a question of asking too much of the people themselves for your own personal benefit. That's the way I interpret it. Next up, we have Suki.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, for the question. So from the Chinese, if word for word using the same sequence, actually the translation from Derek Lin, the people's hunger is due to the excess of their rulers' taxation, is the closest to the original Chinese wording. So in the Chinese wording, there's no when that kind of meaning. And also I want to add that the text at that time is, I think, is mainly the rice. So if they get too much of the rice, the people don't have anything to eat. So that's why they go hungry. So yeah.
Thank you. And could you read that line again, please, Suki?
Oh yeah, I'm looking at this like 5 versions. So
Mhm.
The Derek Ling's version, the people's hunger is due to the excess of their rulers' taxation. So they starve.
Thank you.
So that's the word for word translation from the Chinese wording. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Aman.
Yeah, I'm glad Suki brought that up because I'm going to since I'm standing in for Jason, I was going to
Mhm.
share, if I can, my screen just once more and show you the line she just read and what she's talking about. This is Jason's translation, which, yes, Derek Ling, I think, is really close. And he says, the people's starvation, the ruler taxes each too much. This character right here is kind of like an apostrophe S. So it's the ruler taxes eats too much. So therefore they go hungry, or therefore hungry. It's really sparse. I mean, to go literally word for word from Chinese to English, you don't get a comprehensible sentence that an English speaker would necessarily understand. And so trying to make it as close to, in Jason uses starvation instead of hunger, but it says find a way of translating this term, is caused by the excessive taxation. Ruler eats too much, or rulers taxes ruler eats too much. Ruler taxes eats too much. It does mean something like the ruler consumes the taxes that are meant for people to be able to feed themselves, especially when you're talking about tax collection in the form in kind or in, rice. So yeah, I wanted to agree that there is less of sort of the logical if then puzzle at work here, or cause effect that we would have from one person's translation to another, where we switch cause and effect. It's simply something following or happening in congruence with something else. You can call it causal, you can call it correlative, but either way, it is an action to stem on your part as ruler, because these are the results you'll likely see.
Thank you for that, Aman. Are there any other comments regarding verse 75? If there aren't, then we'll go ahead and move on to verse 76. Go ahead and type exclamation point in the chat. And to share your favorite version of verse 76. Evanique.
So this is from God as Nature Sees God, a Christian reading, chapter 76. When people are alive, they are soft and weak. At their death, they are hard and rigid. All young things, including grass and trees, are soft and frail. At their death, they are withered and dry. So all that are hard and rigid take the company of death. Those who are soft and weak take the company of life. Therefore, powerful weapons will not succeed. Remember that strong and tall trees are the ones that are cut down. The strong and rigid are broken and laid low. The soft and weak will always overcome.
Thank you, Avanique. Next up, we have David.
Okay. So DC Lin, when man is born, he is tender and weak. At death, he is hard and stiff. When things and plants are alive, they are soft and supple. When they are dead, they are brittle and dry. Therefore, hardness and stiffness are the companions of death, and softness and gentleness are the companions of life. Therefore, when an army is headstrong, it will lose in battle. When a tree is hard, it will be cut down. The big and strong belong underneath. The gentle and weak belong at the top. We try the thing in English. I mean, I'll be interested to hear what Jason's translation was. He's like, the thing in English, a man is born gentle and weak. At death, he is hard and stiff. Green plants are tender and filled with sap. At death, they are withered and dry. Therefore, the stiff and unbending is the discipline of death. The gentle and yielding is the discipline of life. Thus, an army without flexibility never wins in battle. A tree that is unbending is easily broken. The hard and strong will fall. The soft and weak will overcome. So it's just, even there, it's just very interesting to me that, when a tree's hard, it will be cut down in the Lin versus when a tree is unbending, it's easily broken. I mean, it's a very different sort of focus. And again, at the last sentence in Lin, it's, the gentle and weak belong at the top. Whereas being in English, the soft and weak will overcome. I mean, belong at the top versus overcome, will be cut down versus, easily broken. It's a lot of variation or just in those two translations.
A lot of I'll just make a quick comment before we go to Brian and Brian. But yes, there are a lot of variations between, and I appreciate you reading the Fang version because there's a lot of variations with this particular translation that I'd seen across the board and reading several different ones. But you called out one of the key differences, this idea of how the tree is like unbending or easily broken versus the idea of being overcome. Oh, here's Margarita. So next up, we have Brian and Brian. I want to come back to that. Thank you, David.
I'm going to read Stephen Mitchell's version.
Okay, thank you.
Men are born soft and supple. Dead, they are stiff and hard. Plants are born tender and pliant. Dead, they are brittle and dry. Thus, whoever is stiff and inflexible is a disciple of death. Whoever is soft and yielding is a disciple of life. The hard and stiff will be broken. The soft and supple will prevail.
Thank you, Penny. So next up, we have Brian.
Okay, this time I go with DC Lau. A man is supple and weak when living, but hard and stiff when dead. Grass and trees are pliant and fragile when living, but dried and shriveled when dead. Thus the hard and the strong are the comrades of death. The supple and the weak are the comrades of life. Therefore, a weapon that is strong will not vanquish. A tree that is strong will suffer the axe. The strong and big takes the lower position. The supple and the weak takes the higher position.
Thank you for that, Brian. Margarita, I know you just entered the room, but would you like to read in Bahasa verse 76? I hate to put you on the spot, but if you
I just realized that we just changed time. I mean, time difference, yeah, for 1 hour. That's
that's okay.
I didn't realize it. Yeah, already changed time. Sorry, I need to pick up something first before I can read it. Please continue.
Quite all right. Quite all right. All right. So I will read the Ursula Le Guin version. Hardness. Living people are soft and tender. Corpses are hard and stiff. The 10,000 things, the living grass, the trees, are soft, pliant, dead. They're dry and brittle. So hardness and stiffness go with death. Tenderness, softness go with life. And the hard sword fails, the stiff trees felled. The hard and great go under, the soft and weak stay up. I apologize for a little bit of the stumbling on words there in my printer. It's out of ink. So go ahead, actually, Aman, you can go ahead unless
Yeah, I'm ready. I knew daylight savings would get one. So Margarita, no hard feelings. Let's see. Okay, sharing the screen. There we go. Is that visible to everyone?
it is.
Okay. Chapter 76, Soft and Tender. When people are alive, their bodies are soft and tender. When they are dead, their bodies become hard and tough. When all are alive, grass and wood, they are soft and delicate. When they are dead, they become withered and dry. Therefore, that which is hard and unbending follows death. That which is soft and tender follows life. For the same reason, the unbending army cannot win. The unbending wood can be broken off. The large and unbending are brought to a low position. The soft and tender can climb to a high position. So you can see there's, again, some parenthetical explanation to make those lines clearer. And again, there's a little bit of challenge, and that's why you get so many discrepancies, I believe. You were talking about this word in particular, which actually can be translated most commonly nowadays as fold, but break can also be applicable. So talking about a wood that can be broken off is absolutely a apt way of translating it. One thing I did want to point out that this is one, and I, as you all may know, I am a scholar of Chinese. I appreciate Chinese, but it has an inferiority. No punctuation. And without the punctuation, some of this gets to be a real challenge. Translating these sentences without the use of commas makes them very, very difficult to understand. But when you do see them inserted and realize what are examples or an aside, then I think it gets to be a little bit clearer. The second line, when the 10,000 things, when all living things, or when all are alive, comma, grass and wood, comma, they are soft and delicate. You understand that this is an aside, an example, an explanation of what he means when he says all are alive. But if you read it without the commas, and they don't have them originally, when all are alive, grass and wood, they are soft and delicate. It really kind of confounds. And I think there's some of that stumbling that happens in the translations as people try and understand what is meant by certain terms being added within a sentence, seemingly as a non sequitur or as hard to sort of make fit in the logic. The word, and David, I'm sorry, I can't remember which translation it was, but when you were reading one of them, they used the word unbending to translate the word qiang, which I almost smacked my head on the table because I spent a good 2 hours this weekend trying to come up with a good word choice for qiang, because this is where some will accuse people of over philosophizing or over analyzing the Dao De Jing when they read this and they're like, it's really straightforward: alive, good; dead, bad. That you don't need to think deeper than that. True, you don't generally, but once again, the Dao De Jing is from cover to cover extolling the virtue of not putting things into a false dichotomy. It is simply describing how things are when they are alive. It is describing how things are when they are dead. But that word qiang appears several times in the Dao De Jing, and this is the only chapter in which it appears as a negative. Every other time it appears in the text, it appears as a positive. And actually, it's pretty easy for me to show you that. Just go, move this out of the way, up a couple of chapters, past 74, and we can get to any chapter where we see to keep supple is to be strong. Qiang is translated as strong. Again, you could just go through and you'll see that mostly throughout the Dao De Jing, Jason translates qiang as strong, and it is almost always a positive virtue. It is only in this one chapter that it is described as a negative, which begs the question, why? Why this time is strength not translated as strength and not seen as a virtue, but it's seen as being unbending, unyielding, rigid was another one I ran across a lot and tried very hard not to default towards that choice of translation. And I think it is because of this line. For the same reason, the unbending army cannot win. Here, you want to impress a lesson on the young princeling, on the young, your young ward. And what you want to impress upon them is, no matter how strong you think your army is, they're never unbeatable. In fact, truth be told, the more strong you see them as, the more likely they are to be overwhelmed and broken. And that is just kind of the art of warfare 101. You don't necessarily win because you have all the best on paper. You actually will win by virtue of remaining flexible, remaining soft, and not even engaging in the first place if you can avoid it at all. So at the risk of being accused of overthinking passage 76, I do think that there are some layers of lessons at work within it.
Thank you, Aman. Actually, it reminds me there was another chapter recently that we covered, that when people are weakest, that and you feel like you're strong, that's when people are most dangerous. And I forget which verse that was. It was I think it was in the 60s or something like that. I'll try and find it.
You may be right, but daylight savings got me too, and I'm not hungry right at the moment.
So with that, I really liked this verse quite a bit, and I'm eager to hear what everybody else had to say. I appreciate you calling out as to why being strong, or unbending and rigid is kind of seen as more of a vice, or strength is seen as a vice in this particular instance, less and less a virtue. Or hardness is seen as a vice, not a virtue in this particular, in the verse that I had read, because that mostly that yes, there's a yang component to this that when I was reading it, that I kind of felt like it was a different tone completely from all previous verses. But I'd like to hear what everybody else has to say first. I have a lot to say though. I don't want to go on too long. David first, followed by Avanique.
Yeah, so I mean, thanks for the great comments by you, Joe, and also by Aman. I mean, the main thing that I in some of these other translations, they put a positive spin on it, and that's what I was trying to get across. And I think I don't know if it's. I'm still trying to understand or decide whether that's really. I mean, I don't know the Chinese, but if that's a reasonable interpretation. But the way that others, I mean, there still is, as exactly as Aman said, this negativity with the army line or with the soldier line, which I'm not certain can be avoided, because there definitely seems to be a couplet there that they're trying to say that the strong army is not going to prevail, it's going to lose, headstrong, whatever. But for the tree one, where he's saying that this tree that's unbending, whereas I said it, every other or all these other passages has been a positive. The way that some of them are, or that I'm seeing a lot of the translations, that's what I was trying to contrast with, is that it's more about when a tree is strong, it is cut for use. So there they sort of spun it around that it's strong, that it's ripe, it's ready. When a tree is hard, it will be cut down. Again, it's not a matter of cut down in the negative sense of it will be destroyed or it'll be damaged, it'll be broken. It'll be cut down like it's in its prime now. It's ready to be used. It's ready to be harvested. So that's how they seem, some of these translators, tree that has the hardest wood will be cut down. I mean, they're always, you can interpret it in a positive way. So that's what I was trying to point out. And as Aman said, all of these other references throughout there have been positive. And so I'm curious on his take, but I think that again, I read the army one. I've been trying to see if there was a way to interpret that positively as well. And I don't think that's possible, but the tree one, the unbending tree, it seems, at least I don't know whether they're bending over, whether they're contorting themselves too much to make it positive, but I can definitely see in the way they're translating it a positive way of interpreting that it's the tree that's ready to be used. It's ready. It's not a tree that's being broken and damaged. It's a tree that's ready to be harvested.
I'm not going to pretend to have the answer to this. But yes, I do think they could twist themselves in knots toying with that cognitive dissonance, especially if they've recognized, wait, Chang has been a positive throughout all of this. Why now in this chapter is every reference to strength a bad thing? Why is it? And I think that cognitive sort of dissonance is intentional. I think that if what I said was true before, and it's a big if, but if the Dao De Jing were to be read as a progressive text with an aging and maturing audience, a princeling who's gone from young to older, we're now at the point where he's got his own regiment, he's got his own army, and he's probably being told by oh my lord, you have the strongest army. Yes, look at them, they're very impressive. And the wise advice is to say, yeah, that strength's not a great thing. It's taking the positive, the thing you've seen as positive all along, and it's flipping it, in a mirror so that you can see another perspective on why this may not be the great positive that you have thought it was all along. It could actually be your Achilles heel. I have seen the translations that talk about a tree's whose wood is hardest is ready to be cut down to be put to use. I have actually seen that. I don't see that in the original Chinese because that word means to break or to fold. But I do think that that is also an allusion to other texts, particularly texts like the Zhuangzi, where it talks about things that are useful will be harvested, destroyed, taken up. It is that which is useless, which endures. There's a famous Chuanza parable about seeing big ugly tree in the middle, off the middle of the road, and saying, why has nobody cut that down? Well, it's got too many knots and it's too, it's this big useless thing, and that's why it endures. That's its virtue. So there may be some allusion to that in those translators' decisions. But yeah, I think it's very striking that here, what has been treated positively for so many chapters suddenly turned on its ear and told, no, that's not a good thing.
So next up we have Suki, but and then I'll make some comments.
Yeah, I actually agree with David. I think the strong here is still the normal positive strong thing, because the army, let's imagine if you have a country, right, and you have a strong army, well, you need the money to support your army. So if you put your best resources into your army, this country is not well balanced. And also, if you have a strong army, meaning you have threatened from other country, or you have to use your strong army to fight a rebel in your people. So you use this strong army to fight these people who it's not like you're suffering from your ruling, so they can have revolution. So in that sense, you will die as a country if you have a strong army. That's some of the interpretation from the Chinese books I read, and also the tree is also the same meaning as David you mentioned. Which tree will be cut first? Always the strongest, largest tree. So it's a positive way to see it's a strong tree, but in certain, if you want to use it, if you want to use your strongest army, your whole country will have the energy, the energy of the country will divert because the power is used by your strong army. So in that sense, and also it's linked to the last sentence. The strong is in the up, right? The strong is up, and the soft is down. Also, it's like that. If the tree is strong, he's gonna be cut, and he's towards the downhill side of his life circle. Yeah. So in that sense, I still think, I don't think he will only use one word to use, only in one sentence or one paragraph, twist the meaning of that. Yeah, I still think it's the strong, the normal way we think of strong. But in that context, it will make the country, it will lead to death.
Thank you, Suki. And next up, actually, Kevin, I accidentally skipped you. So please go ahead next.
No problem, man. I got a couple of things to say. One is follow up one before I talk about the Chang, strong or tough. Another word also appeared to the text, 弱, tender or weak. That's Dao, yin yang, which Dao, yin and yang, with sometimes one word. You have also embedded something. It's not just for example, our English words. Beautiful is beautiful. If in the Dao De Jing thing, beautiful come and ugly going to arrive too. So one word, it could be either side. So how do you use it? For example, the last one, I will try the 强大处下，柔弱处上. Chang water is so soft and raw, right? But they strong. However, they under. It's a different literally. That's how they use the word. That's something I need to think about more. Another point. Let's compare this to 7 years ago. How are they looking wisdom or knowledge? They compare surrounding. Here, here's a look at compare from human self, say was a newborn, alive compared to it death body. That's comparison. They also from the grass, the living things to the death, all things. Also between human to the seven thing or all things. Then that's another comparable. It's not like, for example, modern contemporary modern days, we look for wisdom, technology, AI. That's one approach. But there's another approach that's 2,000 years ago. That's also, it's that approach, if we switch our mind, they understand. Because the things around us, grass, wood, tree, and it's beautiful for me. And also I'm going to see, I would say consider it's the metaphysical nature. It could find some answer for our knowledge or wisdom. Thank you.
I'm just going to interject here for a moment. When I read this, I kind of just see the strength, the stiffness as a negative in the sense that if you're almost as if it's fixed in the way its actual being, that it's not going to change, it's not going to adapt. That's the way I look at this when I'm reading Ursula Le Guin's version. Living people are soft and tender, corpses are hard and stiff. That living grass, the trees are soft. So this idea that if you are too fixed and you don't change and you don't adapt to the environment, that you ultimately will die. And that happens as with not only individuals or people, but that happens with institutions themselves. If a business or something along those lines doesn't change, if it's stiff, if it's stuck in its ways and it doesn't adapt to the times, then it goes and it's actually ultimately undercut, essentially taken out. So I have a hard time seeing the strength and the stiffness of the tree as in a positive sense, and that's just my interpretation for this particular verse. So we have a lot of people in the queue, so I'm going to go with next up is, I believe, Penny or Brian.
This case, it's Penny. Well, maybe I'm like reading this from the poetic viewpoint, but I thought that this was a wonderful way to give a lesson to somebody that if they think it all, they're going to see it all the time. Because he's saying, like, look at people, when they're young and living and flexible, that's good. When they're dead, they're stiff. Or trees and plants and woods, that when they're alive, they're vibrant, they move, they're flexible, things change. When they're dead, they're stiff. And so this ruler, if he remembers anything, when he's going through life and walking around, every time he kind of looks at something, if he kind of thinks of it, he might think, oh yeah, something that's alive, it's got to change, it's got to be flexible, it's got to move. And that's what they're trying to say to him. Don't become dead and stiff so that you never change what you get something in your mind and you refuse to look at any other options. So I just thought it was maybe great advice that you know, he might remember then.
I am inclined to agree with you. Thank you, Penny. Next up is Margarita.
Yes. I think I want to read the Bahasa first. Is that okay?
Oh, please do, by all means.
This time, I think it's very similar with Amon's and Dao bersifat lunak dan menentang kekerasan. Manusia hidup di masa mudanya bertubuh lemas, tapi setelah mati menjadi kaku dan keras. Segala benda di dunia ini, pohon, rumput, waktu tumbuhnya adalah lemas, tapi setelah mati menjadi kering dan kaku. Maka keras itu adalah sifat kematian. Sebaliknya kelembutan itu adalah sifat kehidupan. Oleh karena itu, tentara dipersenjatai kuat tidak dapat mencapai kemenangan. Kayu yang kuat digunakan sebagai tiang penyangga. Maka yang kuat itu tempatnya di bawah, sedangkan yang lemah tempatnya di atas. So from the Indonesian translation, I think what I feel is we cannot avoid to be one day we will be stiff because that is a part of our life. We were younger, we are flexible, but in time we will be unbended. So we can that is our future actually. But this is something that, just like Penny said, we need to know this, realize this, be conscious that there will be time for that. However, I also agree that in this chapter also say that the unbended wood should be used as a place to hold something. That's why it should be below. One thing that is being held by this stiffness is something soft. I think this is more about putting a priority. When you live, you need to put the flexible part of you to be alive as the priority. So you don't you don't make yourself harsh into being not flexible to die. Particularly this chapter, I think to be against violence, not to use violence, because violence will make death become faster coming into your life. We should embrace the flexibility of life, because that is even though eventually we will die as well. So that's what I see from this. Unbending is also a future for us. However, we should be aware about it and embrace our flexibility while we are still alive, and that is the priority. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Kevin.
Thank you. I would come about the middle. I'm going to read out. The middle is the Chinese 故皆强者死之徒，流落者生之徒。是以兵强则不胜，木强则折。They talk about yes, death and life, and also but military strong. It's going to not. It's here to like. I'm not sure you guys question this. See, military strong, but not get win. Why? That's different than our modern practice, right? We need each country. If I ask one question, what's the most expensive spending for each country? It's benefit nothing, especially for ordinary people, not for your house, not for social living, but it's destroy. That's the war. However, each country we practice that. Keep increase the military spend. So here's thing: if too strong, it's not going to win. Look at those historical empire. Look from the old Egypt and the latest the Xiongnu in Chinese. It's 176 BC. Also, Mongol Empire, British Empire, Rome, and the latest is World War II, Soviet Union. What's here is superpower ourselves. it's going to, yeah, it's in, I don't want to join conclusion. We kind of think about it. See, it's keep strong. Yeah, and when you're going to drop deep. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Evanique, thank you for your patience. I apologize. I had missed you.
Not gonna take it personally.
Thank you. Thank you.
No, I think everybody pretty much made the points I was going to make, but I do love this chapter, and I remember reading it before, like when I was just listening through the Tao, and the thing that I really, now of course can't get it up. Okay, I think it does. I think it's more I always thought of this poem as being more of a mind thing. So, and what I mean by that is that it's telling you, when Amon was talking about why is strong being used negatively in this one, the thing I thought about was because it's a headstrong, right? So when someone is headstrong, they're stiff, they're rigid, they don't want to listen to any input, they don't want to listen to advice, they just are stuck in their way, and since they are hard and rigid. And so when you're fluid, the Tao always talks about water being fluid.
Mhm.
It's alive, right? And it's fluid, and it's going through, and it's softening the edges of rough things like rocks. So I was just thinking, it was telling you to be like, like water, be flexible. And so then going down, um, when it talks about all young things, including grass and trees, are soft and frail at their death, they are withered and dry. So to me, like, if you could be dead in your 20s and still be walking this earth, like I didn't think of it as like old and young. I was thinking more so like people in their 20s could just be stuck in their way of doing things, and they will go through their life like dead inside, but not alive. And they could be young and they could be flexible, but they're still being headstrong and not listening to anyone. um I think so. It says, so all that are hard and rigid take the company of death. And when I think of that, it's like anybody that takes this position of, I'm always right and I know everything, and other people are just wrong. And we see that all throughout society, where no one wants to admit to being wrong or even admit to another point of view. You're dead. I mean, you're still physically breathing, but you're basically dead because you're not allowing new information in. And then it says here, remember that strong and tall trees are the ones that are cut down. When trees are cut down, in some sense, they're cut down because they may fall on a house. They're big, they're strong, and they're cut down because they're dangerous, because they may fall on your house, or they may fall on a neighbor's house, or they may cause death and destruction. So in that sense, when you become too big and you become, I think I took this as an allegory of becoming arrogant. You need to be cut down a little bit. And I think of that because of a big tree. If it's over a person's house, it needs to be cut down. It could be big, it could be strong, and it could be healthy, and it needs to get cut down. So I was thinking that it's just kind of like a metaphor for that. So on that last line where it says the soft and weak will always overcome, we tend to, as a society, look down on people who are soft and weak. To be soft and weak is a negative in society. And he's saying here, they will always overcome because they're flexible. And in a sense, like soft and weak, we think of vulnerable, but those are the people that can weather the storm. And those are the people who can remain flexible and not take things personally or let things roll off their back, or those are the people, what seems like soft and weak would actually be the ones that make it. So that was my interpretation. But I love this one when I heard it the first time, and I still love it now because I think it's just it reminds us to, you know, be alive, like really live.
Wonderful. That was beautifully put, Evanique. And that is actually what you did, is actually articulate my thoughts more beautifully than I did. So that is exactly my takeaway from this poem as well. This idea of fixed versus growth mindset, where if you're not allowing new information to come in, then ultimately that you will descend into some degree of ignorance, because it's a closed way of looking at the world. And I also saw even the idea of tree that is stiff and hardened. And let me look at the exact, well, my translation. They become dry and brittle inside. And that a tree that is actually stiff is like kind of, it's will easily be chopped down, because it'll ultimately, you know, lose its vitality. Essentially, it'll stop growing. And another example could be looking at this as using strength. And I really liked every single example that you used. Was I had read somewhere where if you look at it from a leadership position, somebody that's set in their ways, unwilling to compromise, unwilling to change at all, then that leader will ultimately be overtaken by their people, essentially, or they just will, you know, they'll cease to exist one way or another. So I really, really liked your comments a lot. They actually captured what I wanted to say much more poetically. So I thank you. Thank you very much for those comments. And I
You're
know
welcome. Thank you.
so, well, I apologize for missing you there for a moment.
No worries.
So next up we have Suki, followed by Brian or Penny.
Thank you. I particularly like the last sentence, 强大处下，柔弱处上. I have a picture, image like a wave. So the crest looks like a strong part of a wave. It's but it's gonna heading to the bottom. And the lower part of the wave looks kind of soft, doesn't make like a great visual, but it's gonna heading to the top. So I see it's more like a dynamic exchange. So that gave me two inspiration from our modern life. One is how we grieve death, because sometimes something greater will be born from the death, because it's evolution, generate the evolution. The second is the vulnerability. Like being vulnerable actually is not a sign of like being fearful or whatever. It's a bravery. It's being strong. So I particularly like the wave image when I read the last sentence. Thank you.
Thank you, and I like that as well a great deal. Hang on. So I see. Well, let me just go to the next comment, and then I'll make a couple quick comments on what you just said. Brian or Penny.
So I have 3 points. I liked what I also liked what Evanique said, and it kind of struck me in this course of this conversation that this, just as the Dao De Jing is written for a lot of it for princelings is the audience. I think that also maybe young professors like let's call him my nephew, could benefit from that. because he's, as I said, he's made some statements that I think are really over the top in terms of, well, like arrogance, like China has no political philosophy. That was his statement. And a week before that, and so a week before that, he had raised the issue that there can be beauty in intolerance. And he was asserting that there can be, one of these family discussions, there can be beauty in intolerance. And so he wanted to talk about that for a while. But he wasn't talking about it. He was making all of these assertions. And honestly, I want this guy, he's in my family. I want him to do well. I worked in an academic university environment. And I know if you go around making declarations like that and then try to defend them, you're going to stub your toe and get a bloody nose. So I suggested to him, on issues like that, don't make statements and then defend them. Ask the question. Can there be beauty in intolerance? And that really is brought up by this verse here in the Tao, in being flexible. And as Evanique and others have now echoed, open to learning new things. The way he's approaching these issues it seems to be very closed. So it just, and wooden and strict and stiff and rigid, all these things that are talked about in the poem, because he would not budge off of that thesis that there's beauty in intolerance. He was really convinced that there could be, or that there is. And so I just said it's better to ask than to declare. The other thing is Penny, I agree with Penny, it's kind of more of a poetic verse, and this ties in a lot with the Tao, but this really, again, this verse reminded me of that. I wouldn't say there's a lot of reasoning in this verse, the kind of logical reasoning. I think that in the first part, they're talking, the author flags something we all know, and one aspect of the thing that we know, that the living are soft and yielding and the dead are rigid and stiff. So, people know, and there's a lot of kind of using, I wouldn't say reasoning from nature, but using nature as an analogy or metaphor here. And and then he goes on to say in the second part, those who are stiff are like they're dying or like they're dead. And then so he starts to, I don't think it's a reasoning. I think it's more of a, you take this on board or you don't. And I think when you think about it, yes, you do. Wow, there's a great point there that's illustrated or illuminated by this metaphor. And that's how this can be so short and so powerful. And as Penny said, poetic. Then the last thing I wanted to mention is the issue, and you've all touched on this kind of implicitly. I want to make it explicit. For me, the issue of time and time frames, because these princelings to whom this is addressed, they might think, well, I need a strong army, and I'm not going to budge. I'm going to be inflexible because I need to win over the next 2 weeks, or I need to win this afternoon. But if you take a longer view, a month or a year or 5 years, you think, well, then you can start to see how maybe you can be flexible this afternoon. You don't have to win right now, but by being flexible now, you can survive and flourish over time. So those are just the thoughts I had.
Wonderful thoughts, wonderful comments. Thank you, Brian. Amon, do you want to comment? I know that it's getting close to your.
Yeah, I'm at almost turning into a pumpkin point.
Sure.
But what Brian just said in some of the chat that was happening with Katie, there's a couple of things that struck me. And Ryan was talking about the timeframes involved. And one of the things that Katie was saying was thinking of this sort of wooden personality as a trait being somewhat intractable. And I was saying, I think of it more as a rate of change that, you know, people will calcify more readily under certain circumstances. But it's something that we can slow down if we change our circumstances. And then thinking of this young princeling, there's also a beautiful allusion because this chapter uses the imagery of wood as opposed to water, which is not an entire, I can't say it's entirely new, but it is fairly new metaphor to the Dao De Jing. Wood has particular associations within the Wuxing and within the yin yang cycle. So there's all sorts of things at work here that are swirling through my mind. But what I did want to say was, think about how intractable many of us probably were right around the ages 16, 17, 18, 19. Our thinking tends to become very concrete, very absolute, very all or nothing, black or white, yes, no, every time. And this chapter does a beautiful job of poking a hole in that sort of thinking, of saying, you know, what you assume, you need to stop assuming. What you think is a virtue may actually be a vice. How you think you're going about things successfully may be, you know, the instrument of your downfall. And using the army as sort of the metaphor or the vehicle for imparting that lesson is really poignant, because as we can see in the real world, many times armies look formidable on paper. In action, that does not always translate to the result you expect. So yeah, I wanted to thank you both because you gave me another dimension of looking at this chapter, and thank everybody. And hopefully Jason will be back next week and do a much better job of explaining his work than I do. But I had fun, and it was great to see all of your smiling faces, and I hopefully will see you all again next weekend or next week. Yeah, daylight savings. We all blame daylight savings.
That's right. But thank you, Aman. You did a wonderful job as always, and it's always an honor to have you here. So, thank you. Thank you.
哪里再见.
Yes, I mean, I liked Brian's comments. I liked everybody's comments. But I know that, let's see if we have anybody else that wishes to comment on verse 76 before we go. But if not, we'll go ahead and we'll close with those comments. I did have a couple of things that I could have followed up with Brian and Suki, and Suki, thank you for your contributions this evening. They've really been wonderful as well. But Shrikant, I'm going to turn it over to you. I know that you want to share with all of us something that's pretty, that you've been working on, a new diagram, and I'm interested to see it.
Absolutely. So folks, this is kind of summing up everything that I've been studying I've been learning from Gita and from Dao De Jing and from the Bible. And I keep on working on this diagram to capture everything together. So this is my new iteration. I had a version of it on Sunday, but I think I have made significant progress to make it even simpler. So I'm trying to capture all of philosophy in one diagram. Okay, that's what I'm trying to do. So we'll let's see how it goes. Okay, so let me get started here. I'm going to share my screen. Start broadcast. Okay, let's see here. All right. Can you guys see my screen? Okay, very good.
Screen, if we can see the screen, but you don't have anything on it, I'm assuming, right?
Nope. So that's I'm going to put something on it. All right. So I want to start is this shape here. Okay. There are two aspects to us. There is the inner aspect and there is the outer aspect. Okay. And there are only three things fundamentally that we have to focus on. The first one is I. Who am I? The second one is world or culture or community, something that is outside. And the third one I call the universal principle. You can call it God, you can call it the Tao, you can call it Brahman. So those are the three things that all of us need to understand. It's not enough to understand one of them, you have to understand all three. So you actually are standing here, right here, and you seek God. You seek universal principles that explain everything, that show you what the world is. What are the principles behind the world, behind yourself, behind everything? That's the you here. Give me a second here. We use that understanding in order to structure the world, to build the world, to shape the world. And then we get it back. We basically sympathize or love what we have created, what we are working on. We love the world. So there is that loop that is going on. So the current words I'm using, I just want to use all words starting with S to make it easier. So we seek knowledge. We structure the world or culture or community using that knowledge. And we sympathize with the world or love the world that we create. That's a positive loop that we have. So in the Bhagavad Gita, this would be the Jnana Yoga. This one would be the Karma Yoga. And this one would be the Bhakti Yoga. I find Bhagavad Gita to be very comprehensive in dealing with every aspect of us as human beings. Now, in addition to this, we have the negative on this side. So this side is basically denying the inner. And this side is denying the outer. You see this entire side, this loop that you see here, it's basically saying yes. It is saying yes to yourself, the core of yourself. It is saying yes to God or yes to the universal principles or the Tao, and yes to the world. So this is full of love. So you can call this love, this whole approach. But we are capable of something else. What we can do, and many times we often do, is that we fear. we have fear of what we are, of other people. So the sympathize actually brings everything together. It is loving yourself, loving the world, loving others. There is also possibility of doing the exact opposite. So you go down like this over here, and then you have the same loop down here. So what we do is let me name these so that becomes easier. So here you can call it, I call it repel. So you're saying no to yourself. You're saying no to other people. You are saying, oh, they are different. You're saying basically no to other people. And what you have here is really the opposite of this. This is, you're kind of denying yourself. This is negation of yourself. That's what you start out with. You negate, you say no to the world. You say no to people. You're afraid of people. And then you rationalize from that to produce these ideas which are false. About 80 to 90% of philosophy is this, of trying to rationalize bad conclusions that they're already formed. And what that does is that actually represses your soul, your core being. So this loop over here is the loop of fear. So you've got love, positive, and you've got fear on the negative. So let's look at it in a couple of ways. So if you look at, so let me just copy this one so I can make multiple copies of it and then discuss anything that you want to discuss. Paste, 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 paste. Okay. Okay. All right. So let me give you some connections here. What happened? Let's take what we're discussing, chapter 9. This side here is what, what Aurobindo called the great souled man that was being discussed here. And this one, Aurobindo, about in chapter 9, he calls it deluded man. Okay, so these were the names that Aurobindo had given to these two ways of being. What this person in the green is doing is that, again, using now the Bhagavad Gita terms, he's starting from his Atma, which is right here. He loves the Brahma, which is right here. And he does his karma in order to reshape the world. And he loves the world and he loves himself. So it comes back. So there is this loop that is going on. If you want to think of it in terms of Bible, right here is the Holy Spirit, the living water in you. Right here is Jesus, which is the word that is going to turn into flesh. Right here is the church or the community that you create, and you love the community. This loop Now, the God in Bible is up here along the same axis, that this axis continues. So you have some grasp. At any given time, you have some grasp of the universal principles, that there is always more. So Holy Spirit is here. Holy Spirit, Jesus is here, and God is further up here. You do not have direct access. Jesus is the intermediary, the Word. He's the Word, the universal principle that captures, that becomes flesh like this, and that transforms the community, that supports, that creates, encourages Holy Spirit in yourself and in other people. So that's the Bible. In terms of Tao, this is the Tao. This is the sage right here. And these are the 10,000 things that you make. So that's the Tao. So I've described, and again, in Bhagavad Gita, this is the Jnana Yoga, this is the Karma Yoga. Jnana is about knowing the core of yourself and knowing Brahma. That is right here. Knowing this is what Jnana Yoga is about. Karma Yoga is all about using everything that you know about Brahma in order to transform the world. And Bhakti Yoga is your love of everything. It's your devotion. So that's this part over here. So I've focused mostly on this. Now, what I want to do is I want to just open it up for any questions that anybody has or any comments. Try to keep comments short and try to formulate them in terms of questions so I can give more details. I have deliberately tried to be very brief. I don't know how well I've communicated these things. If you have any general comments about the diagram, please make them, especially people who are very familiar with this. I've been doing this for a long time and I keep on improving. That's one way of saying it. And another way of saying it is that I did not get it too well previously, but I'm getting it a little bit better, I think. So would love to hear from you. So we'll start with Joe. Joe, go ahead.
So I have a question of, I'm trying to just envision how the spiritual form and the material form,
Mhm.
how you had it on Sunday would actually look with this diagram. I'm trying to.
What's the question?
So we are the spiritual function. Remember, we had the XY axis on
right.
Sunday. Yeah. How would that maybe? Yes, there we go.
So this one, the spiritual, it's basically, this one is the inner axis. So this would be spiritual. Just a second, wrong color. So this is the spiritual axis.
Okay.
And this is the material axis.
Okay, and that's the inner and the outer. That okay. Now I'm starting to see that.
This is the function. This is the form.
Okay. Yeah, that was my only question. That was fantastic. That was excellent.
Next up is Evanik.
Yeah, I had a quick comment and I'll
Sure.
make it into a question. So first of all, I think this is really the clearest one yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I like the word when you say you're repel, in that inverted
Mm-hmm.
part where the deluded man, where you say, you repel yourself. My question is, I guess, you're repelling yourself and then you say you're repressing your soul. Do I have that right?
Yes. So what I'm saying is that I've struggled with these words. Okay. And these are not the best words. I'm just trying to make it simple. So it's like 3 S's, you know, S1, S2, S3. So you seek, sympathize, seek, structure, and sympathize. And on the negative side, you repel, rationalize, and repress. There are multiple words we can use. I think the best word to describe what I'm saying is fear. What happens is that this part, you know, what is happening with these people, or what is happening in you, is that I'll describe it in multiple ways. Okay, so firstly, to describe it in terms of the Tao, it is being focused on the 10,000 things and losing the Tao and just reacting to that. In the context of center and periphery, it is being focused on the peripheral and being afraid to look at the center. So you're oriented exactly in the opposite direction. You are afraid to look at the core of you. You're afraid to look at the principles governing everything. You just take whatever is there in the culture as given. You consider yourself to be beneath it. So you say, the traditions are very important. The books, whatever they say, the rituals are very important. I am nothing. You're afraid of everything that has been produced. So actually what this is that there is a causation like this, you know, saying that goods are here. So what you're saying is that the forms are here. This is the entire, this red over here is what Louis Sullivan calls the inverted self. So what happens is that actual things that is creating the world, creating all the good things, start like this, start from here, individuals, and they are trying to understand the world and then trying to make it better. And whatever they produce, they actually care about it. So this one you can say care. They actually care about it. So they're trying to make it better. They're listening to what is going on. So you see, this is like, you're curious here, you are building things here, and here you're really open to the world. Whereas here, you're afraid, okay? And you're saying everything has already been done right here. So everything is done. And I am just trying to, you know, I am nothing. So I just have to be, I'm afraid of everything and I have to somehow adjust to it. So this is, you're basically focusing on the rituals, things, forms which are already there. And in the process, lose your curiosity, lose your ability to initiate. And then once you do that, then you start rationalizing that, oh, you know, these people are bad people. Or, you know, this is what is going on. There are all kinds of ideas come up. Okay, and that is what this is. And those ideas basically destroy yourself. You know, they're used to crush your spirit. They're saying that, okay, you know what? Everything is automatic. Nobody has any chance in the world. So there are all kinds of ideas at all levels. But all the result of those ideas is to kill the individual, kill your initiative, yours wanting to do things. So that's what I mean. I don't know whether it is clear or not. You want to ask a follow-up question?
No, actually, that was really clear what you said. Yeah, that was really clear. Just taking the time to process it all.
Wonderful. Elena, you're not very familiar with what I'm doing, but please ask me as a question instead of making comments. Go ahead.
Yes, and now I became familiar, and it's a great way to actually to put it into categories. I like it because I would never ever think this way.
Thank you.
Okay.
What's the question?
My question is, okay, so we repress So okay, let me just go back. So with yogas, right? You start with knowledge, then go into structure and doing, acting. That's karma, and then we're sympathizing, observing, and it's bhakti yoga. So with the opposite to that, this inverted self, the self of fear and negativity, how does that work? Where do we start and where do we end up?
Excellent, excellent question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. So the beautiful question. So if you look at the starting point of the positive, you're starting here. See, in both cases, you start here. And the important thing is that in the positive thing, you focus your attention on the Tao. You focus your attention on the Brahma. You focus your attention on Jesus. You focus your attention of asking questions, asking, what is it? What is it? What is it? Trying to understand as a starting point. Okay, so that's the starting point. The starting point for the negative, you also start here, but you go in this direction. You say, what am I supposed to do? What is my community, my tradition telling me to do? I better listen to that. So you are oriented not towards the universal principles, but towards obeying whatever it is that has already been produced. It could be in form of focusing on 10,000 things. So it could be focusing on things which are sensory, as opposed in the periphery, as opposed. There are many, many different versions of it. Another way of looking at it, this is a formulation that Napoleon Hill puts in the Outwitting the Devil, which a book which I highly recommend, because this is the crucial thing. It is this. So you're going either up, like for example, Jordan Peterson puts it, you're either going up, this is going up, or this is going down. Okay, this is your will. This is what free will is. You either go up, which consists of asking questions, being curious, trying your best to understand, or you go down. Napoleon Hill in Outwitting the Devil puts it beautifully. This is having a definite purpose. This is drifting. So it may seem like this large, horrible thing you're doing. No, any kind of drifting will get you there. You just have to react to everything. You have to stop. If you want to go in the negative direction, all you have to do is to stop having a purpose of saying, okay, what should I be doing? See, this is a tremendously moral way. You're saying, what is the right way? What is governing this world? What governs me? This is what happens when you don't do anything. So that's easy, actually, as Jordan Peterson puts it beautifully. Going downhill is easy. You just have to drift. So that is where it starts. Okay, the starting is either up or down. Okay, so the way down actually takes the results of things that other people have done or what you have done in the past, and you are just using them. You're not creating them. So you can look at it. So first step is here. The second step is that you actually do the work. You actually do the work of building things, of creating things. That is hard work. This is hard work, trying to figure things out. Creating things is hard work. So what you're doing here is that you're instead, the second step you're doing is that you're being lazy, you're being reactive, you're being afraid, and then you're going to rationalize it. That's the second step. That here you're actually starting to build things in the second step. The second step here, you're simply rationalizing things. And this, the third one, is the effect of doing that. When you build things according to Brahma, you're doing namaste to other people. What you're saying is that the soul in me greets the soul in you. You are acting like that. Then you feel kinship to the world, to the culture, to other people. They come to you. There is attraction of the world towards you and of yourself towards your soul. So it's an inward movement. It's a movement that brings things together. So that is the third, that is a consequence. That's the third step, which is the consequence, brings things together. What happens here? These ideas actually crush you. It reduces, you're saying you're worthless. You can't do anything. It sustains. It actually allows you to continue on this. There is a cycle of fear that starts by just drifting, then producing these phantasms. These are all fantasies. This is not true. These are false ideas of who you are, what the world is, and what are the universal principles. This is false. See, this axis is the inner axis. Truth is here on this side. This is truth. This is falsehood. And what that is doing, the effect of this is that it is going to tear things apart. It is going to tear you up inside, and it is going to increase the fear that you have of the rest of the world. It is going to make you, hopeless. It's basically crushing you because it's the wrong ideas about who you are, about what the world is, and what the truth is. Excellent question. Thank you, Elena. Next up is Kevin, followed by Ebony. Kevin.
Thank you, Srinka. My question is, how can we apply the form follows function in this idea?
Beautiful question.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this is actually the most profound influence I have had in coming up with this diagram is Louis Sullivan's ideas of form follows function. So this is actually what is happening here is this is the function. This movement is the function. And this function is creating this form. This is creation of the form, okay? So this is showing that function is first, which creates forms. Here, this is the form that was created from here by somebody. Function is your living here. And you're using the forms to actually crush the function. You're taking forms as primary, the 10,000 things as primary, the peripheral things as primary, the starting point. Starting point means form comes first. Here, this is the function, the living function of an individual trying to understand truth. That is the starting point. That is the function of individuals with which we produce the 10,000 things outside of us. When you take those 10,000 things as the starting point, those are the forms. When you start with forms, it crushes the function because you have given up the function. You're starting with the form, and that crushes. This Louis Sullivan calls the inverted self. So he's saying that this is self, and self is full of love. It is love for your own core, love for the Tao or God or the universal or truth, and love for this world, love for the material world. So it is saying, yes, it is an affirmation of all these three. Inverted self is saying no. It is a negation. It is negation of who you are. It is negation of the world. And it is negation of truth and God. So that is exactly, it's just, so this part, the green part, is form follows function. The red part is function follows form. That's it. It's just exact. You just reverse the order and you move from life, living to dying. So that's what it is. Great question, Kevin. Thank you. Evanik, you're next.
Sorry, it took me a minute. I have a question about this whole diagram. Could it be summarized as choices we make? Like we all have free will and we all make a choice. We make a choice to follow who we are and to get to know who we are at the core, or we decide to drift and go with the flow and just drift along.
Absolutely, absolutely. Very, very good. So if you want to diagram free will is right here. This is free will. So you are here. You can either choose to seek truth, which is full of effort, or you can choose to drift. So this is drifting, this is drift, and this is seeking. This is taking responsibility. And so if you want to put it at, and the important thing to realize is that do not think of this, that these are good people and these are bad people. The more profound point is that this is what we are capable of at every point of time. So we stand here all the time. No matter what you have achieved, no matter what you have achieved, those are all achievements. You are standing and you're saying, do I go up or do I go down? Now, what happens is that if you habitually are doing good things, then you have this building up. So what happens is that this keeps building up like this. It's like a spiral, keeps building up. So it becomes easier and easier to do. But at any, and similarly, the negative thing would keep going like this, down, like that. But at every moment, you are standing here. And you have the ability to do good things or bad things, to turn things around or to screw up. So it speaks for the power of will at every moment. It respects the net result of the accumulation, the habit, and the result of those things. But at the same time, it speaks for the power. The other thing is that you can look at it another way. So to kind of make it more fluid, think of it as a circle. Okay, so you have this circle over here, and then you have a littler circle down here. So this proportion is important because the red circle actually cannot exist by itself. It can exist only as a parasite on the green circle, because green circle is life. If you're just like this and nobody is helping you, you have no other resources, you have no capacity to actually do anything. You just die. So actually what is happening is that there are these things, it's a little bit more complicated. You have all of these things going on. So it's like a fractal system. So you may be, for example, in some part of your life, you may be following purpose. In some part of your life, you may be drifting. All of them actually interact with one another. So it is not saying, okay, these are good people, these are bad people. That each of us has ability to do this at any time, that each of us can do this in some aspects of our life and not in other aspects. So it is like a fractal system. But I think the principle of what is positive and what is negative, that I think this captures it. But there are these kind of levels. Like when you're, for example, what happens when you can look at human interaction. You can say that you are at, you can be interacting somebody who's at a greater level of knowledge than you. You can be talking to somebody who has a greater level of physical achievement than you, or a lower level. All of these are possible, and the dynamics of it are different. So there is the other thing that you can put in the kind of interaction between people. There is interaction between the positive and the negative that we can talk about. So all of these are real. So it's like, in order to figure out what is going on, you kind of have to do like the fractals of this one. So I don't know whether this is what do you think, Avini?
Yeah, I was thinking of this when you said that was going to be my next comment or question. Was I think you already covered it when you said we can be both invert self and the oh my gosh. So like you can be the great souled man in one area and the deluded man in another area. Because like when you were talking about, this isn't about good or bad people, I think we all can probably identify, it helps us to identify areas where we're drifting. Like this would help us identify areas where we're drifting, where we feel like there's no hope and we're giving up, and look at areas where we're improving, and maybe take what we're doing in those other areas and apply it to areas where we may be drifting. So that's the way I see it.
Wonderful. Sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, I think that was it. Like that's the way I see it. It's like kind of like you could use like all this stuff from the triangle, the top triangle, and kind of like lift other areas of your life out of that inverted self and bring it back up to the great souled man, or applying the bring a function to it, so to speak.
Yes, I agree, but I want to clarify one point. I mean, it is true that some people are good and some people are not so good, are bad. Basically, if a person who is habitually doing this, who's doing, just a second, wrong color. There can be people who are mostly doing this all the time. Okay, if they are doing that, they're basically good people. There are people who are mostly doing that, So you can definitely judge people by the extent to which they are doing one or the other. You can say, look, it is, so it's Aristotle's points about virtue being a habit of saying that you're doing the right thing. This is a person, virtuous person, or a great souled man is a person who does that on a, largely does that. It doesn't mean that I'm saying that doesn't mean that they don't have parts which are drifting. Doesn't mean that they are not capable of doing other things. They have free will, but there is a difference. There is a valid concept. It's a very important concept of saying, is a person primarily a good, or a positive person or a negative person? So that's definitely a valid distinction. Wonderful. All right. Does anybody have any other comments or questions? I'm going to give 10 seconds. Brian and Penny, what do you think?
I think it's amazing. I think it's great. I think that I'm looking forward to, I hope we'll have opportunities to continue to look at this as we consider the texts.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So this is my best summary, and I keep summarizing things. I like many things about the diagram. It is kind of a spiral. Go ahead, Penny.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, because when you first started out, a lot of it was just a triangle, which was kind of the part at the top.
Mm-hmm.
But that left out so much of what might be happening, in the world and with people. Assuming basically that, what, like everybody was seeking and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so this makes it a lot clearer, because there's kind of both paths and both possibilities.
Wonderful, wonderful. No, absolutely. And I find it very helpful. I find the inner and outer distinction to be very powerful, because this is essentially kind of consciousness here, and this is existence. So it just captures so much and allows me to think. I also like, this is what Joe made the point of the 8 diagram I had before. And it is kind of coming back to that. The previous diagram I had on Sunday was, let's see here, where is it? It was something like this. And this one is much better because it brings things together in a far more integrated way. So I really like this. So anyway, all right. Thank you very much, folks. And I appreciate you giving me feedback on all of these. I'm struggling, I'm trying to understand things. I'm trying to put things together. And it's really wonderful to be able to speak to you folks and get your comments and get your feedback and keep on developing this further. So thank you very much
for sharing. I mean, this is really, really, I mean, my mind's kind of blown right now, actually. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm going to sleep well tonight having seen this.
Wonderful. Wonderful. All right. Good night, folks.
Good night. Take
Good
care,
night.
Shrikant.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Joe.
sharing. Thank you, Evany. Thank you for your comments this evening.